Guys, welcome back to Racecomp Engineering Podcast. Today we got Gresham Wagner, 2022 SRO TCA Championship on his debut season. Welcome.
Hi, nice to meet you guys. Good to be here.
Thanks for joining us today. You know, we've seen your rise in the SRO series this year. But we want to backtrack here first. You had a good sense of background in go-karting.
Yeah.
Right. Starting when you were very young, big motorsports family, correct? So you tell us a little about that. How was it like growing up, being at the racetrack when you were little?
I guess, when you're young, you don't really know any different, right? Like if that's what you're brought up into, like that's just normal, going to the race shop on the weekends, going to the track and, just being around it, right? So that's just kind of what I grew up with, like as early as I can remember. And it wasn't anything massive. My parents raced short track racing at Langley Speedway.
Okay.
It seemed huge at the time to like, a little kid, 2 or 3 years old, it was like this crazy world. But I just, I loved it because like that's all I knew. And of course my parents wanted to get me involved, as soon as I was old enough. So I just started racing there. And didn't really know what was going to come of it, of course. Like, you're 5, 6 years old, like you just go out there and you just drive. Like you don't really know what kind of world you're getting into necessarily. And I just kept on, doing that, like going to bigger events, like faster carts, and I think obviously my parents, especially like my dad, right? Like he had a better sense of what was going on than I was, right? Like I didn't know that I was, I guess talented. Like
Did your dad started go-karting as well, or
no, he
just short
didn't
track?
actually.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. They just started in cars, but as a kid, like you don't know relative this and that. Like you just go out and you try to win. But I think he saw, the potential that was there and tried to give me the opportunities to, keep advancing, keep getting better and better. And I mean, you can see like that's actually the suit from when I was like 10 or 11. I think I won like my first
That's
national
awesome.
championship. Yeah. So that's the karting suit I have. And
Okay.
I just did that for what, about 10 years almost.
Mhm.
Yeah. And then, of course, at some point, I had this whole thing with, back surgery I had to have and all that. So I had to step away from karting.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the end of the story there for a while.
Right. Yeah, that's crazy. Your back surgery. I mean, and you said even after you tried to hop in a cart back afterwards, and it was so unbearable, right? Just no suspension, hard seat.
Yeah, I mean it's painful enough, like as a healthy, functioning person, right? Like you go out there and like people are breaking ribs, like they're sore, like
Yeah.
it's physical. And
Mm.
I did a race or two, and the pain, like everyone asks me, like how was the pain? Like yeah, it hurt a lot, but like that wasn't the ultimate thing. It's the weight transfer in a cart, and how finely tuned it all
Mm.
is. Um, especially without the suspension, right? Like the driver is a part of the whole chassis and everything, the way it's
Right.
working. So I was missing probably, I always say like around maybe 4 to 7 tenths that I was
Mm.
lacking because of that. And it was just
Right.
always going to kind of hold me back and be there, I guess. Like I could have competed in like a
Mhm.
midfield or kind of, a little bit off the front. But like to me, I just, it's hard to stomach. Like I'm just never going to be able to be where I was at.
Oh, for sure, for sure. But I mean, even before that, I mean, yeah, two-time WKA manufacturer champions. 2013 U.S. Pro Kart Vice Champion. You definitely made a name for yourself. Before you had to get the surgery too. So that's
Yeah,
yeah.
so karting is very physical, and I mean we have one back there, and I'm afraid I'm going to pull something getting into it. So talk about like how you transitioned from karting and how it prepared you for tin top racing in an actual car, like the lessons learned from that, how they transfer to racing with a roof.
Yeah, I think so. That's a question I think a lot of people always are trying to kind of figure out is because there is a big difference there. There's stuff that carries over and there's stuff that's completely different. And I think for people that didn't come up all those years through karting and immediately go into cars and all that is kind of it's a curious idea. And um to be honest, I tell people like I don't really I don't really know how much the driving transferred. It's more of like the mindset and the racecraft, just the understanding of start to finish how to run a race, how to race around other people, like the approach
Mhm.
to like data and feedback, like all of that kind of
Mhm.
stuff, a lot more than the actual feel of the steering wheel and all of that. So I know for myself, when I was younger, um, the Skip Barber program was still really strong. I
Yeah.
mean, they have new owners now. They're doing their thing and everything, but like
Mhm.
this is like 2010 was like a peak kind of era for Skip Barber with
Yeah.
Yeah.
people like Spencer Piggott, Stage Karam, those kind of guys that I raced against in karting coming up through that program, and so it was always a thing that my dad was kind of pushing me towards and wanting to do, and I being like a young teenager or whatever, like I was a lot more hesitant. I thought it was going to be a lot harder. I didn't know that I'd be able to be successful, and like I was tentative to take that step because I felt like it was just such a going to be such a steep learning curve, and like I was comfortable with what I was doing with the success I was having in carts. So
Mhm.
when my hand kind of got forced there, like that's the only way forward. I jumped in and I was like, I just had so much regret because I was like, this is natural, like
Yeah.
it feels better. And people ask me that. I'm like, driving a car is easier than driving a cart competitively to me. Um,
Right. Mhm.
there's a lot.
Is was there a point early on that aside from the support of your father or just the family involvement that you remember feeling like this is my thing? You know what I mean? Like people in football, kids when they go from the
Mhm.
small stuff to the medium, there's a point in which you go, wow, like this is me. You know, was there ever a time that you remember like in a moment, maybe before a race, maybe before practice, maybe when you're trying to pass somebody, or maybe after you got around somebody, that you went, yeah, like I totally got this.
Um, I think there's kind of a bit of like two parts to that because
Mm,
I will say, like outlook wise and future wise and everything, like racing is unique in like how much money it takes. You know what I mean? Like elephant in the room, like super expensive, right? So like
Right.
I was always hesitant and tentative of like how far this would go and really, you know, uh, being like, oh, this is what I'm doing. Like it's never a guarantee. But in terms of like my own capability, like I think as soon as I started, racing against like other recognizable names and other, what I mean, people that went on to success, you know,
yeah.
Mhm.
that's kind of
Mhm.
when I was like, oh, okay, like I can do this, like I'm good enough. Because if you can race and be competitive against and beat people, and then you see them go on and they can make that next step, then you're like, yeah, that can be me. So,
Right.
yeah, probably around when I was like 12 or 13, I would say is kind of when I was like, I might not be the absolute best, but like I can be.
Hmm.
Mhm.
And that always translates into I mean, when my son was coming up and he was like 6 in indoor league karting, I used to always tell him, once you pass that other kid in front of you, don't do the same line you did to get by him, or else you're going to tell him how to get back by you, right? Um, Tell me about the transition from support from the dad to okay, now you're out there and all the input from say dad, on technique, technical, et cetera, translated into your own inner uh, knowledge and confidence. To tell me about that.
Yeah, I think that's a funny question because there is always going to be kind of that push and pull.
Yeah.
When you start off so young, when like you're 6, 7, 8, like that's all you have is like the guidance. Like you don't have that knowledge. You're doing what he says. You're taking the coaching from him and everything. And even when I first got into cars a little bit, like I didn't have any car experience. He was doing short track racing that he had the back in. But like a car is a car to some extent. He still had more of that. Once I kind of got the grasp on that, and especially once I started having some success in MX5 Cup, I was like, I know more about this, right? And like, I think some cockiness, right? Like it's your dad, and you're like, Dad, like you've never driven this car, like, and so with no offense intended, like at some point I was like, you got to let me do it because like I know what I'm doing. I still out of the race post session, like there's always those conversations, there's always kind of like those debriefs and bouncing ideas off each other and everything. But like we've got car to pit radio and everything, like that's always a bit of a hot topic because he's still your dad, he still wants what's best, and he's still going to sit there in the middle of the race sometimes and say something. It's like like I've got it. So it is a balance. I think it's a difficult thing, somebody that's been coaching for 10 years to then be able to take that step back and remove themselves a bit, when they're that invested in you. But I think it's a communication thing and a confidence thing of like explaining, hey, I've got this. I appreciate your help in these ways. But like when I do this, I need to be able to do this, if that makes sense.
Fun fact, I was on the early morning rental car bus leaving New Orleans, and I was sitting next to your parents. I didn't even know it. And they were talking about, the event, and I was telling how I was there working with another team and this, that, and the other. And they're like, yeah, my son just won a race, in Touringcar or whatever, And I was like, oh yeah, cool, who? And I was like, oh, like I hadn't even put the two together. And it's just interesting because, I'm over working, with GT3 cars and teams and paying attention to that. And yet, we do what we do here for Subaru, and didn't even realize that until at least mid-season that you were just killing it, Tell us about this past year in Touringcar, because it just seemed like you brought a broom, and we're just sweeping stuff left.
And that's 7 wins, 10 podiums this year, debut season. I mean, you came out swinging hard, right? That's
yeah. So, I mean, I had raced for a few years, but only an MX5 Cup, right? Like that.
Which MX5 Cup. That's no joke.
Like that's only MX5 Cup.
That's some of the most intense racing, I think. Like I love watching IMSA weekend broadcasts. And one of my favorite ones is MX5 Cup because it's so intense. Right?
First place to 50th is like 1 second.
Yeah. So I knew like I could drive against like these great drivers and everything. Like I'd done it again, right? Like I said, like all these drivers have come through. Some have gone on to the stuff. Like I was able to win there and be successful. So I had the confidence, but that's still the only car I had driven. I wasn't sure exactly. What is this other car going to feel like? What's the style of racing going to be like? Like there still is that adaptation. And, I didn't really know what the next step was going to be. MX5 is like, it's great in its own right, but there isn't really a clear defined ladder there. After you do that, it's kind of like, you've got 5 different options or more. And, Tech Sport reached out to me and they said, hey, just come test a car, come, see what it's like and everything. And, thankfully they're based out of VIR, which is the closest track to me. So I just drove down there, had a test day, and I was like, this car, like, it's different, but like it feels good. Like this is a good car, good people, a good team. Like you kind of can get that sense with some things early on, right? You do it and you're like, this doesn't click. Or it's just like, wow, this is a great fit. Like this is gonna work. And I did have the scholarship money coming from MX5 to kind of make that transition possible. So going into the first race, I know we were confident and everything, and there was a learning curve, with TC racing. There's multiple classes, and also the way you race people, right? All the cars make their speed, in different ways. Especially depending on the track, and Sonoma's kind of it's a weird little track, right? It's got a lot of technical sections, but it also has that torque. Our car was great in the corners, great at the top end, didn't have the torque that the other ones did. So that was the biggest adaptation, I think, is like how to race other people in different cars. Because in MX5, it's like everyone's identical. It's more like karting. It's like you get a good corner, you come off it, like, you stuff it on the brakes in the next corner, and you know what everyone's gonna have. So there were some mistakes that I made, like it was a learning process. So, the first 3 weekends, I think I'd win one race and I'd struggle a little bit in the other one. I know Sonoma, I finished second and first, and I was like, okay, that's a good start. NOLA, we had a flat tire in the first race. I DNF'd that. I think we went to VIR and I crashed in one of them, which was like my first ever really, that's the first time I've ever like DNF'd a race from crashing in like years. So that was a struggle. And then we really had to refocus and everything. And I think we all took, and me especially, took what we learned from the first year, that learning part of it, and then really went and executed in the second part. And I was pleased with myself and with the team and everyone to be able to, say, okay, there is this adaptation period. Now let's go take all that and do what we can do, and to actually see like that progress and that, that success really come and tie in at the end.
So from transferring from progressing from the MX5 Cup to the actual BRZ, the car itself was fairly easy transition getting used to, right? Like, yeah, I'm sure it helped. Same philosophy, lightweight, momentum car. If someone else were to follow your footsteps, would there be any advice you would give them from doing that progression?
With the series, with the car, with the style of racing, with everything I talked about, I think the biggest thing was don't overdrive, which I know sounds like really fundamental, but like MX5 is like, it's ragged, it's on the edge, it's like intense all the time. And
but it's a mind game with those drivers a lot of times, right?
It's crazy. Like I can't stress enough to people, like, even when it sometimes looks calm in the broadcast, or you're watching from the sidelines, like, we drive those cars so hard and like so on the edge. Like, everyone at the front is basically at the ceiling. Like, you can't drive the car any faster than we are. And going into the TC racing, like, again, that was my mindset. And like I said, there's some tracks, some instances, like, you can't drive 11 tenths, right? The other car is just going to be better in this section. Like, you just have to accept that and just drive well balanced, put the race together. And it's like the cumulative time kind of mindset of like, let me make this the best, average lap time across the race. I don't need to drive super hard for these 3 laps, because this isn't what's going to ultimately win me the race right now, and then, different tires, different brakes, different everything. Like, I went in and I was driving the car way too hard, some cars, like that more. And, the BRZ was a great car, but my struggle was on the brakes, just overloading the front on the entry and just, battling with understeer. And MX5 was like, driving on the brakes and kind of just trail brake in and drive it on the nose. And that was something I had to like unlearn, a bit, was modulating that a bit. And just, backing it down to a reasonable level and kind of staying there, not letting your emotions, put you up here. And, that's what I'd say to most people coming out of MX5, because MX5 is like so raw. I think anything else you do, it's calm down a bit and like don't overdrive.
You mentioned a mishap at VIR during this 22 season. A lot of people watching this, are track day guy, like they're autocrossers that are doing their first track days, first couple of years. You got time attack guys who might start doing wheel to wheel. What's the mindset? What zone do you have to get into after that mishap when you get back in the car to try to erase that? I mean, as an instructor, I've told people, okay, we can't go back to that lap. We're going to put that behind us. It's always easier said than done. What are you doing in your head at this level, right? Which is essentially pro racing. I mean, like it's like it's a pro weekend, right? What are you doing to get beyond that after a mishap?
You know, it was tough. I will say the number one thing I think that helps off the bat was you've done it enough. So I've done 30, 40, 50 races. Like at some point it doesn't stand out as much as it maybe could, right?
Right.
There's always another race. There's always been other races. Like you just kind of, like you said, just you're already like focusing forward all the time and everything. So the fact that like you crashed didn't really change how I do things. It's still okay. How can I do well with the next one? That's like an automatic kind of mindset. It was an issue of, I was like, why did this happen? Right? Because it's preventable. And I think for anybody that has like a major mistake or like, has a big crash or anything, it's kind of not like, oh, I'm not capable. Oh, like that's going to happen again. Any of that kind of like negative, like headspace type of things. It's, I've done it right 99% of the rest of the time. What went wrong here? Because it really, when you break it down, like to eliminate that 1% isn't really that hard. It can be this big thing in your head, but really it's, you just need to do what you were doing and just eliminate this one small little thing that caused it. And for me, again, it was overdriving everything, overdriving the brakes, overdriving the situation, the corner, and getting a bit like too amped up about the way the race was going. When I looked at it, I was like, I knew I could have won that race and I didn't have to do what I did the way I did it. And so it's just, right, it was like going into the next one, just saying, I can win the race if I don't do this, right? And so to backtrack that a little bit from like that situation more broadly, whether it's a track day, like I'm sure everyone's done, 30 clean laps and then they have that one bad one. It's what did you do different, right?
Right.
Because you shouldn't focus on the one time you did it wrong. The 30 times you did it right, okay, how can I just eliminate this one thing and just get back to, the fundamentals of what was working? I mean, I know everyone's got a different mentality, but that was mine. Was just I've done it enough. I knew I could do it without making the mistake again.
So you talked a little bit about strategy with MX5 Cup. Just drive 11/10 for an entire race, no big deal in a spec car. But with the BRZ, it's different. So how involved are you? Sound like you are a little bit with like the race strategy and even like car setup. Are you like in the weeds with the engineers on setup, or are you kind of just talking broadly with them, or how does that relationship work?
So I think there's some drivers that are, have their own level of involvement in terms of, the setup, the data, all of that kind of stuff behind the scenes. And I've always been kind of a proponent of like, we all have our expertise, right? Like mine's driving and like also feeling the car. My expertise is not in determining what the setup should be. So I can sit there and talk all day about what the car was doing, what I want it to do, what could be better, all of that. When it comes to the actual changes to make, I personally, right, like number one, I respect the expertise that other people have. And two, I kind of know that I don't necessarily feel confident in what I'm going to say. So I just say, hey, it's doing all this. Take that and do what you want with it. And I know some other drivers are a lot more involved. It's like, I want this change. I want this change this much. And I, more power to them, right? If that's what works for you. I don't like thinking about it. I don't like messing with it, right? Because it's not my focus and my number one area. I can sit there and diagnose how that change affected the car, but I'm not going to tell you which one to make, if that makes sense. So, especially
so you're easy to work with.
I mean, I don't know about all that, but like, well, like with the BRZ, right? Like I'd never driven the BRZ. I don't know the setup of those cars. I could sit there and talk about it. I know basic car setup, you know what I mean, that carries over between all cars. But when it came to that exact platform. I was like, hey, you guys are the experts. You guys know the car. Like, what do you want to do? You know? And I can go out and say, hey, like that was better. I liked it. It did this better, did this better. Like maybe we should think about, going a bit more in this direction. But, I tend to try to just focus on the driving, tell them what it's doing and let them take care of that side of it. Personally.
Yeah. So you've never driven before testing with Tech Sport, neither first or second gen BRZ, correct?
No.
This was first out. Okay. Awesome. So I mean, what were your initial thoughts with the car after the first testing?
So again, that's something people ask is like, how is it different, or like what surprised you? And I think I went in expecting it to be worse than it was, and I know that sounds bad. I know that sounds bad, but like it was a great car. But like at the end of the day, like the MX5 Cup car is like the most nimble, lightest kind of car you're going to drive. So my expectation was like, this thing's going to be heavy. This thing's going to have a lot of body roll. This thing's not going to be as good on the brakes. Like, that was just my perception, the way I'd built it up. And, I was maybe a bit ignorant, or presumptuous, because I got in the car and I was like, wow, this car it's pretty good, like, yeah, it's a bit heavier. Yeah, it does some things a bit different. But like the braking was still like, I was so surprised by the braking, and I mean, it wasn't really that hard to adjust to because it did it so well. Like body roll, I mean, yeah, it's got characteristics, but it wasn't like some top heavy, whatever rolling around. Like it was a good balanced car and everything. So
Yeah.
I think both with the BRZ and with like future cars to drive, like that really changed my mindset in that, like, you can't really judge a book by its cover. And you kind of have to keep an open mind when you go in to drive something for the first time. You can't say, oh, well, these people drive like this. Oh, well, I've heard that. You just got to drive it yourself and see what it is.
Question: have you driven, and forgive me not knowing, and the guys are gonna give me stuff about it. Have you driven the GR86 Cup yet?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
Don't have hands on the car yet. I've driven an iRacing. And
okay, so I was that was what I was going to lead into. I was want to backtrack a little bit. So between the whole sim racing thing, between you having give go-karting and going to Skip Barber, did you do any sim racing between then?
Yeah, just it's one of those things like that age, I was like 15, 16, like I had
it's awesome, right?
Yeah, I had all my friends, like I was in high school, I didn't have much responsibility, like I was sim racing all the time, like jump on there with like your 5 or 6 friends, like, so that still kept me into it. I was still connected to racing, like I still had those relationships from from karting and from everything. So I mean, both in being able to still like express my passion, I guess, like everyone's going to say, of course, iRacing is not the same as a real car, like, duh. But it was still like, it was what I was able to do at the time. And to be able to still share that and share those relationships, like, I think everyone knows, like, the relationships are honestly a big part of it, like the on-track stuff aside, like, that's what, makes it so great and what makes you keep coming back and everything a lot of the time. So,
yep.
Do you foresee being in TCA? Does that allow you to do GR86 Cup as even a shoe-in, like as a substitute or anything? Or is that in your future?
Okay, so like it's the beginning of the season, nothing's been announced and all that, but I expect to be able to have a lot of time in the car and everything, and I'm excited to see what all that car is. I think it'll be a good transition from the TCA version into that version. I think there will be some things that are different, but it's still, I like the fact that I had that 1 year, in the platform to know what I'm getting into.
Did I just hear a soft, subtle scaling, but unreveal, almost a reveal?
I mean,
January 1st, right?
I mean,
Time will tell.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, there's a lot of things. It always takes moving pieces coming together and everything. But I have my plan for next year.
It would be a natural shoe-in. I think it would be a natural progression to take the champion in TCA, drop him into a front-running GR86 Cup car. So
I mean, we can't tell you how excited we are to have the series come. I mean, as BRZ Subaru owner fans, I mean, in seeing Australia have a spec series and everything else, we're like, man, why is it taking so long to bring this to the US? And now that they have in a slightly expensive, more expensive form, it's okay. But it's we're glad to have a true Subaru race car series.
Toyota.
Yeah, Toyota the race car.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely have to mention Gazoo Racing developed platform.
No,
What's your favorite track?
Oh, my favorite track.
Wait. Two-part. What's your favorite track, and what track do you want to do in what car?
Okay, so all-time favorite track I think is Mid-Ohio, honestly. And I'll give the short answer as to why, and it's because it's more technical and there's less draft. And if you've watched MX5, like Daytona, Sebring, like these Road America, these big tracks, like you can be out front and then you can be in sixth. I like Mid-Ohio because like it's more of like nothing against that style of racing. Like I've been doing it for forever, but it's a refreshing, nice track to be able to get out, drive your race, drive better than other people, and get rewarded for it, and have that track position, everything. It's a really technical track. It brings out the best in drivers, and it's just something I've always liked, like just the flow, the feel, the way it races. In terms of like the track and combo I want to drive the most, this is gonna be a weird one, but MX5 always, well, I don't want to say always, but they had some street courses. First it was Houston, and then it was Toronto, and now it's St. Pete. And I've driven St. Pete a bunch, and it's awesome. And they stopped going to Toronto the year I started racing. And so I know that's like an oddball answer, but it's just something I never really got to do. And like track experience, everything that like I think would be a lot of fun. And then everyone also talks about Canadian Tire Motorsport Park. Same kind of story. We used to go there. It dropped off the schedule. Like that car at that track, I think would just be wicked. Like, so it's, the answer is going to be the two tracks I haven't driven that like I almost got the chance to drive, and just the timing didn't match up with when I joined the series.
What's your street car?
I drive a 2000 BMW 323i.
Is
my
it stock?
first car, same car I've been driving my whole life.
Is it stock?
No.
There we go.
But,
okay.
Funny story is, my dad found that car and like it had already been modified and everything. Had the stuff done. So like, first car owner, that was nice. It's like I got it. Hey, it's all taken care of. It's all done, right? And I mean, I love that car. It's gotten beaten on. It's got, I think, 197K now. I mean, right? Like I drove it in high school through college, now, and I mean, the car is, almost as old as I am, and it just keeps going. So everyone asks, like,
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, everyone asks like, oh, when are you going to get a car? And I'm like, until this one like stops working. Like, that's just what I do.
Want to go back real quick to the 86 Cup car in iRacing.
Yeah.
Your fastest qualifying time VIR this past year was 2:10. Have you been able to match that pace in the new Cup car in iRacing, or faster?
I've been able to go faster, and I'll give a little bit of backstory here that a lot of people might not realize. Like in iRacing, that car is too slow right now. Honestly,
Interesting.
Because I mean, there's a lot of different factors. Like you have track temp, you've got the tire compound things, but tech sport, like we built, or the team built that car
Mhm.
in-house. So the cars they got were, stock from the dealer.
Yep.
Bare
Mhm.
And they did laps on the track. Like you can get that car if you're driving it hard, you can get that car into the 207s stock at VIR.
Wow.
Or like I don't want to say stock, like basically, like it wasn't fully built.
Yeah.
And
tire makes it.
Yeah. But like 207s, 208s is like a feasible thing. So
But wait. For sake of all the techie guys that are going to say, "Whoa, like, okay, wait, is that like a R comp? Is that a Hoosier? Is that a 200 treadwear? Is that like basic coilovers? Is you know what I mean? Like, give a little background context on that because everyone's going to be like, wait a minute, you know what I mean? Like, and people are going to try to go out and build that.
Yeah, okay.
So they're going to be blowing up cars left and right.
We were on the Pirelli, race tires from TCA.
Okay.
So I mean, not street tires or anything like that.
Yeah.
And you'll have to pardon my ignorance because I don't remember or know exactly what stage, the cars were in, but I will say they had some modification. They were not fully built into the race car. Somewhere between
right. Okay.
And
all right, cool.
I don't want to say what was there because like I wasn't involved in that build process.
Yeah.
But the specifics aside, the point is like we were restricted in TCA. Like we were driving in TCA slower than, preseason, like, figuring out the car and everything.
Gotcha.
And so because of the BOP and everything, we're running, I think, like you said, I qualified like a 210. And in iRacing right now, I think, if you run a fast lap in the GR Cup car, you can get into the 208s there. And to me, like unrestricted, the TCA car would be doing that or a little bit faster. I qualified a high 206 in the MX5 Cup car this year at VIR. So like I expect the GR Cup car to be a bit faster than the MX5 in reality.
Right.
And so I know iRacing doesn't always match up, and we can sit here and get into the semantics of it. Point being is it's a bit off. Yeah.
Okay. That's good to know, actually. Yeah, interesting. Okay. Cool. What was your most challenging race this year, would you say? But in either, MX5 or SRO.
Yeah, that's I'm gonna say St. Pete in MX5. And I feel like I'd say that every year because it just really is like that challenging. Like, I mean, not just like for the driver, like mentally and everything, but like it's hot. There's not a lot of like clean airflow, because you're down there, with the walls in the city, like the brakes overheat, like the engine runs hot, like, it's tight, like close quarters racing. It's on the edge. Like it's just the most intense race that we do each year. And I don't know that it was the toughest in terms of like overcoming something or a competition or like having to fight for that win, but just overall, it's like the most grueling. I would say Indianapolis race 1 TCA was probably like the hardest race, taking that, that factor of St. Pete out of it. Like I made a mistake and slipped to the rear. And we were tied for the championship at that point. So, a yellow came out and then I had to drive back from the rear up and I had to win that race basically to break the tiebreaker and get into the lead going into the final race. So that was kind of the toughest, right? Is coming back to the field, having made a mistake also and like having to like refocus and readjust. That was pretty tough.
So if that was like if there was like a Netflix series of the season, that would be like a turning point, like super emotional triumph type of thing, right?
Yeah, and I mean, look, like I made a mistake and it ended up taking out another driver and my teammate, right? Like and it was my fault. 100%. I'll always take blame for it, right? So, some people would be like, oh, well, whatever. Like me, like I was upset. Right. Like I was upset at myself. I was upset about the situation. Like I was upset for the team. I was upset, I was back in last place now. Right. Like there is all of this kind of going on, and like I kind of was like, okay, well that's the championship, right? Like at that point, the person I was tying the championship with, Carter, he was out leading the race, and I was like, well, what now, right? The yellow came out, and I just knew, like, we spent the whole year, working towards this or whatever. Just deal with this after the race and just put it out of your mind and just go drive the car. And so to be able to do that and to have a good enough car and to manage to come back through and to win that race was like, like that's the only thing you could do, or like you had to do, to win it. So like, yeah, it was.
Have you had that happen before in your career where literally, you went from up front with the other person you're fighting for in the championship to the back, and you had to make that comeback? Like, had that happened before, or was that a first?
I don't know about the exact situation. I'll say Sebring, the race before that, I put down the pole lap and then blew up. So I started that race in last.
Wow.
And same kind of thing. I had to win that one. So I had to come from last, the weekend just before that. So maybe that was a trial run for Indy. I don't know. But, I've definitely had my fair share of, having to come through the field or like come back from a mistake in qualifying, a mistake early in the race, whatever. Yeah. I don't know that I always win or always, get back to where I was, but I feel like I've always had to have those instances of resetting and still just driving back up and making the best of races, for sure.
Yeah. Question. So, fantasy world, if money were not an object and support were unlimited, would you want to go whatever you're going to do next year to GT4 and then GT3, or would you just jump straight to GT3, or would it be any kind of open wheel? Like, what's your dream scenario for racing? Like if you were sitting next to me on a plane, I said, I'm gonna just throw money at you over 5 more years. What do you want to race? What would you do?
You'd think I'd sit there and like dream about that, but I really don't, because it's not the situation. But but I will say, I think with the way the stuff is structured now, it is like somewhat of a linear progression if in some people's heads, right? You can go from where I'm at and go to TCR or GT4 and then go to GT3, and then either in the SRO paddock or in the IMSA paddock, they have both their varieties of GT3 racing, and to kind of get a hold and make a name for yourself there. At the same time, right, I've seen people that I've raced against go on and have success at this level or this level and here and there, and I feel confident that it wouldn't be easy to like skip some of those steps, but like, would I be capable? Ultimately, I feel like yes, and especially there are the different classes and everything, right? To jump into a pro ride and perform at a pro level is extremely difficult. To get your feet wet in that pro am or that am class, and to have that room to develop, as a younger driver into the higher classes, I think, would I be able to go out there and be a solid am in GT3 if I, did some testing and tried to do that tomorrow? Probably, yeah. Just based on the other people around me that I've seen do it.
Yeah.
Okay.
You've never raced international, right? Not
Besides Canada,
right?
Canada's like a couple miles up the road.
Yeah.
Do you have interest in racing in Europe, or for the right opportunity, maybe?
I think anybody would want to do that, at least at least at some point, for a stint of years there. So like, your unlimited money thing, right? You're saying, I'd want to get into a GT3. Honestly, I'd want to get into a GT3, get the experience, and for sure go race some of those, the hallmark races in Europe. Spa, Bathurst 12-hour even. I know they're integrating GT3 into the 24 hours of Le Mans. Like, all that stuff is great. And if I could just write the story my way, of course, you know, that's probably the path I'd want to take. But
Now, would you want to eventually become like a factory driver where you get that check every 2 weeks and they just send you all over the place to just drive with this team, drive with that team, and you're just wheeling?
Okay, so I think the easy answer is yes. And again, I'm going to say for a period of years, like who wouldn't want that? I think that's an awesome lifestyle if that's the point in your life that you're in. You know, like go here, go drive for these guys. You know, go in here, you're doing this event, you're doing this event, you're going to be here on this date, like you're coaching, you know, over here. All that stuff is great and kind of like a wild kind of blur, you know, to some extent, depending on like how deep into it you are, right? I think at the same time, the right opportunity, even like domestically, you know, you get paired up with the right guy, the right team.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's some of these guys that have been, you know, driver pairings for 5, 10, 15 years even, you know, and I think maybe there isn't the glamour to it, but you look at like a John Bennett and a Colin Braun, you know, situation. And it's like, I look at Colin's got a good situation, just doing the same thing. He's driving. It's not all of this all over the place, everything. And
yeah,
I think that's maybe overlooked or a bit underrated maybe by some of these, you know, younger
He's
drivers
found a
that
good
are,
balance.
that are looking at like, I want to be a superstar, you know, doing this. So I think there's a bit of something there for everyone, depending on what their fit is.
I think I say that because, you know, what, half the paddock is paying the race. 3/4 of the paddock is paying the race. Quarter of the paddock's getting paid the race. And at some point, and I'm bringing it back to your parents, they probably want you to get paid the race. They're probably like, bring that back. Let's put that back in the pot. No, I'm joking, but you know, I just wonder because, you know, like that's just the world. I mean, most racing in the world now is, you know, people are paying in. You know, there's a lot of series, a lot of racing, not a lot of fans.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'm a race fan, like, you know, first and foremost, I have been like my whole life. You know, I follow all this stuff in depth, and like, of course, you notice all that, especially when you have that driving background. Like, you can look at this stuff and be like, you know, kind of analyzing all the different situations and what's developing, what's going on all around here through different series. The reality is, unless it's like you're talking about, you are that, you know, that small percentage that has a factory deal or has gotten paired up with the right person. Aside from that, like MX5 and GR Cup are where you're going to get back at least the most money. You know, if you go race TCR or you go race GT4, like you're not really winning back any money. You know,
right?
MX5, right? Like it costs less than 250,000. I mean, for me, you know, significantly less than 250,000. And to win that, you know, I've made money that year if I win the championship. And to do that at the level of MX5, like in the hierarchy of series, like I don't know a better deal, right? Because like I could move up, but like it's not sustainable for me. You know, I could go race GT4 for a year, and you know, you basically are betting on there's an opportunity that's going to come from this. In MX5, I can like make my own opportunities, or in GR Cup, I can make my own opportunities because if I can win, it doesn't matter who wants to, you know, work out this or what opportunity comes. I've got the money and I can figure out what to do with it. So like, there's some security.
The GR Cup prize is pretty big too, right? 100,000 or so.
I think right now for the champion it's 50,000, and they're doing per race stuff, and they're a bit more per race heavy. So yeah, GR Cup pays, I think it's 12,000 to win per race, 10,000 to second, and like so on, and is a bit heavy in the per race payouts. And MX5 now still does their championship payouts of 250, 85, 50, and so on, and they are starting the per race payouts, but they're a little bit lighter on that side. I think it's like 6,000 to win and then 5,000 and so on. So each of the series offers a good bit of money. They do it a bit differently, but at the end of the day, for somebody like me, like it's invaluable because like I wouldn't be racing without that.
Right.
Yeah. I think a lot of people saw like the price tag on the GR Cup thing and were surprised or maybe a little put off because they're hoping for something cheaper, but I don't think they understood how that is on its own a completely different reality than most racing, especially with a payout. And so we'll be watching that with interest.
Yeah. Well, I think we're coming to the end of this.
Do you want to plug your website?
Is there anything you want to plug? Your website and social media, Instagram?
Plug time.
Well, I'll tell everybody the same thing is, if you've paid attention at all, you're not going to find anybody else with my name, right?
Your YouTube, your YouTube video, first thing.
Yeah.
So
all my social media, all my everything, I always tell them first name, last name, you'll find me. Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, Gresham Wagner. There's only one of them, so but yeah, I'm looking to do some more next year. Also, like some more in-depth videos at the track, behind the scenes, kind of documenting some of that, because I know a lot of people, they watch the races, but for people that aren't that deep involved or aren't working on a team or whatever, they have the interest of what actually does this look like? What does this feel like what is it like at the events? Especially for somebody that's amateur, on the brink of that kind of stuff, what does that look like? So I'm looking to do some of that next year and to just get more involved, kind of sharing behind the scenes of stuff. So if you want to follow along, look me up, and I'll be putting out some of that, hopefully for GR Cup as well as MX5 Cup. So
nice. Hopefully maybe we'll see you out with some of the races out there coming up next year.
So absolutely.
We want to see these cars in action. We've been waiting too long.
and let us know once the official January 1st announcement for next year happens, or
No, it'll be good. I think that series is going to be as exciting as everybody thinks. So
awesome.
Well, Gresham, thank you for your time. We really appreciate it. It's great to have someone like you on board, join our podcast, especially in the GR86 and the BRZ chassis that we love, and real big part of us and our company. So thank you for taking your time and joining us today.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
No
Thanks,
problem.
man.
We'll catch you soon.
Cool.
Thank you.
All right, see ya.